listeners, welcome to this conversation. As you know, we have a series of conversations with leaders from HR and business, talking about different aspects of talents, and they're all housed under what we call Talent Coven, which is basically how do you manage talent without witches and wizards. Basically simplifying the concepts around talent management. So today I have a very special guest with me from the healthcare industry, actually. Shishendu Mukherjee. So Shishendu, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vimal.
So Shishendu currently is the HR director for Narayan Hrudayalaya, which is actually a pioneer in many ways in the healthcare industry. For those of you who are familiar, but more important, he's also worked across other industries before coming to healthcare. So he's worked with conglomerates, he's worked with technology companies, he's worked in the telecom industry. So has a very interesting perspective around talent. So Shishendu, we will launch in straight. So why don't you give us a bit of a background and perspective around talent in the healthcare industry? What are the challenges, issues? Maybe a broad brush understanding for us.
Vimal, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. I think it's an absolute pleasure to connect up with you once again. And well, yes, I guess, and as you've mentioned in your introduction to me, that I've had a fair amount of industry experience across talent. Now, to start off this conversation, I would first like to give a little bit of a context to the healthcare industry from a talent perspective, in the context that how do you utilize talent? Where do you use talent? In most cases, like in any other industry, be it a distribution sales network or be it a manufacturing organization, the core is actually done by a set of processes. The core of the business is a set of processes which you can capture. Unlike that, in healthcare, the core of the business is actually run by doctors, the clinical staff.
Yeah.
Okay. And but the reality of the fact is that the clinical staff in our country prefer to be on individual contracts and not be part of the organization as a full-time employee. It gives them flexibility. It gives them flexibility to see. Medicine is just like law, so you have to practice. As the word says, you have to practice to be an expert in that space, right? So one, you really don't have any binding towards the organization. Okay. So when you say growth, when you say the organization development, every doctor in his or her own right is a center of excellence. Okay. So from that point of view, to say it's a collective of talent is actually a fallacy. It's multiple silos of talent that you have. Okay. The other challenge that you have in healthcare is when you have let's say a hospital, which is an organization, and you are building towards a future, which basically an expansion, be it organic, and let's talk about organic growth itself. The doctors essentially focus on their patients and their practice largely. Okay, there are of course exceptions. There are several people who build organizations, but beyond a certain remit, they will not be able to stretch, saying that okay, I can really have a conglomerate or I can have a large organization. And that is where non-clinical people come in.
Right.
Now, please understand that there are these two sets of people. You have the clinical people and you have the non-clinical people. The reason why you exist is actually the clinical people. The revenue is completely driven by the clinical people. Correct. However, the responsibility of P&L does not sit with them. It sits with the set of non-clinical people.
Right.
So it's a very eclectic mix over here. You actually want growth and drive growth in a hospital through a set of people who are not directly involved in getting your revenue.
Correct.
So, and in that context, if you look at talent, clinical talent is abundant. I mean, there is very good clinical talent which is available. The way to manage clinical talent in a hospital kind of a setup is to give them opportunities. Every single doctor looks for a challenge.
Right.
And the success of Narayana has been built entirely on that. Narayana, as you know, has sort of always looked at the affordability quotient as the bedrock of their services, right? But within affordability, what it also does is there is this question of plenty, many patients come. So when the number of patients come, the complexities also increase.
Correct.
So the doctors are happy to be there because their practice continues to grow and flourish. On the other hand, it's a bit of a challenge, getting good non-clinical talent, because that's where the play is, Bimal. They have to run the P&L, not by themselves, by influencing a set of people who will then get the patients to get the revenue in.
Got it.
So that's where the fundamental challenge of healthcare is. So healthcare doesn't suffer a talent challenge as far as clinical talent is concerned, because as long as you have a value proposition, clinical talent will be available.
Correct.
But you have to sustain that value proposition. For the non-clinical piece is where the actual challenge is. And the other thing also is that, purely from a business standpoint, if you set up a hospital, a normal hospital, even in today's world, will take around 6 to 7 years to break even.
Okay.
Now, that's a fairly long gestation period. For a person who's out of a grad school with, let's say, 10, 12, 15 years of experience, 8 to 9 years, 7 to 9 years is a long period of investment that they're putting without really showing any outcome.
Correct.
So they don't really want to come to our kind of an industry. They would rather go and, in 3 years in let's say, FMCG, they will show exponential growth, and that will reflect very well in their CVs.
Correct.
So fundamentally, these are the two challenges in a way, if you look at it from a landscape point of view, that we have in healthcare.
So could you, Shishendu, deep dive a little bit more into the non-clinical? And, I presume that by non-clinical, you also mean staff like, who sit perhaps a little bit in the middle. So they're not doctors, but paramedics, nurses, etc. So maybe can you deep dive a little bit in that? Because not so much the administrative staff kind of a thing, but these people who are in the middle.
See, even within that, Bimal, the challenge is more in terms of nursing. The challenge is not in paramedics. Okay. India as a country has not really evolved from a paramedical point of view. You do have clinics. See, paramedics have only two places to practice their trade. One is a hospital or have their own clinics.
Right.
But a paramedic is almost like this. A paramedic is only as good as the doctor refers him to be. Okay. So there is always an umbilical cord connect to some doctor or some hospital or some larger setup that is always going to be there. Okay. Which is where paramedics generally, try to associate themselves with one hospital, stick to that, and then also have their parallel, clinics running.
Practice or whatever,
Yeah. The challenge is in nursing. And the challenge in nursing is not in India only. It's a global phenomenon. And especially with this pandemic now coming, I have had people from Germany, from the UK, from the NHS, all reaching out to us saying, can you send us trained nurses for a consideration? And you keep hiring. And so it's almost like we become a training center for nurses. We get nurses, we train them for 3 years, we send them off to NHS, then they flourish over there, they go for a contract. We've been having conversations on that level, that nature as well, and it's both in the UK and in Europe that we have that happening. But nursing continues to be a big challenge. While if you see the landscape of availability, it has actually grown. There are more number of nursing schools that have opened up, more intake that is happening, but there's a different angle that you have to look at when you look at nursing talent. Nurses, a fresh nurse graduates at the age of, let's say, 21 or 22 max.
Right.
Okay. She comes into the workforce at the age of 21. In 2 years' time, she's around 22, 23, that age. So number one, there are sentinel events in her life, which is marriage. Soon after, there is a child, and therefore those, and then depends on where the husband, in our country it's where the husband is based. So that transition happens, they move out of mainstream. Getting them back into mainstream after a period, like with you and I was in Tata's, we had this second career option. You remember we had launched this program.
Yes.
I think something like that for nurses in India specifically would bring a lot of help. And in this case, what happens is once a nurse is out of a system, she's practically lost. We don't know where she is.
Correct.
That's a huge challenge. That's a huge challenge we have. So at the entry level, we have a steady stream of people coming in, and those who stay or come back or continue or take a break, all that, but continue somehow, then, at this 4 or 5 year plus level, I have continuity of talent. In between is where my challenge is, that 2 years to 4 years.
Sorry. So if I may just ask that, what percentage of people actually, you are able to, let's say, retain or continue in the industry, not necessarily at Narayan, but in the industry broadly, what is the percentage you'd say you stay back and create a career after that 5 year period?
So my 5 year numbers are around 25%, 5 year plus.
Okay.
Which is 25% of my total population. Yeah, 20 to 25%. I wouldn't say more than that, definitely. That's my statistics, of course. But if you look at the other side of it, if you look at attrition in nurses, attrition in the industry is around 40%.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I'm taking the entire range. Yeah, I'm taking the entire range. It's 40%. It's huge, huge. So that's a huge challenge from a nursing standpoint.
Okay. So how do you, if I may take those 3 buckets, right? So there's the pure clinical staff, doctors, and so on and so forth, and, experts, if you want to call them that. And then you have the, middle of the road, and, you said paramedics is less, but maybe the nurses, etc. And then you have the administrative staff. I leave the administrative staff out for a minute, but for the other 2, how do you really build a pipeline? What are the kind of things you are doing, or you are suggesting that the industry should look at actually?
Okay. So inherently, Vimal, from a clinical standpoint, okay, most hospitals also have an academic program which they are associated with.
Right. So
MBBS grads, all of them, I mean, MBBS today practically doesn't have any much value. So you have to do your DMB, you have to do your master's, MD, right, whichever way. So most large hospitals have that as a program. So we have an entire pool of students who are either DMB students or MD students who are associated with a hospital from a very early age.
Okay.
I mean, early age as in early in their career.
Yes, yeah.
And some of them continue to be there. If we are able to give them good guidance and good and build a practice for them, they come back and they join after their exams. Also, they join us. So, that is one. However, and on the other end of the spectrum, you have the senior doctors.
Okay.
Senior doctors, essentially what happens, Vimal, is once they have, senior doctors is like somebody who has set up their practice over a elongated period of 10, 15 years of, being with a society or a patient. They generally don't want to get out of that space because they've built an empire. They built their name, everything around that thing. So they generally won't move out of that space very quickly. Okay. And they continue over, not only with us, but they flourish in their own practice because of the name that they have created. The middle, which is the junior doctors, is where we have a fairly high attrition that happens.
Okay.
And when I say talent pipeline, I try and get as many of them back from whenever we can get. They might be working in any other hospital. So as we are backfilling, we will hire a junior doctor and then grow them in the system.
Okay. Okay.
So that's about the clinical piece. Now with nursing, it's a huge challenge, as I said. With nursing, typically hiring somebody laterally is almost an impossibility. Almost an impossibility. So typically we will hire and at the entry level, and we will lose people at the 3-4 year level. So it's like a inverted, kind of a pipeline where the entry is at one level and the exit happens somewhere else. The good thing is that in our system specifically, the training mechanism for nurses is very good.
Okay. Okay.
So not only on the job training, but we also have a nursing school. So people who come in get trained very thoroughly, which in a way is a double-edged sword, Vimal, because of their training, they are very hot property outside in the market. So people are happy to just buy that. All they need is a page which says they have worked in Narayana, and their price shoots up in the market. Yeah. That's the reality.
That's the reality, yeah. So slightly different aspect, Shashendu, as we, the last couple of questions. So
Sure.
One is that, there's a lot of talk about digital and virtual and, all that sort of stuff. How is it impacting, your industry, but also particularly maybe, your company? What are you seeing around you?
No, Bimal, see, as an industry, there is no doubt that a lot of digitalization is the way to go. I
Right.
mean, and this pandemic has actually pushed us, sped up the process towards that. Okay. Fortunately, Narayana as a group has been way ahead in that race.
Okay.
So we have invested very heavily, and for over the last 7, 8 years actually. Uh, right from having our own hospital management system. So we used to have one which was outsourced. Now we have built our own,
Okay.
to software which is like the EMR software, where basically you go to a doctor, he doesn't give you a prescription, it's all on a tablet, and then you just get a printout, or you get it emailed and stuff like that. So things like that. So that kind of digital intervention is inevitable, and that is something that we have also been experimenting with, something which is called a no contact OPD. So you have to pre-book on your phone. You are given a time slot, you're given a ticket, a token number. All you have to do is come and flash your phone. It's like at the airport when you have to just flash your phone and get through right up to the to your flight.
Right.
So that's the thing that we have experimented very successfully with in one of our hospitals. We're trying to roll that out. So that kind of process digitalization, something which is inevitable. You cannot not do it.
Not do it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
On the other hand, when I look at clinical expertise being put onto a platform, which is like the digital interface with a doctor, online consulting. Honestly, that has always met with a very mixed response. Okay. There are fundamentally two reasons. One is a large portion of our clients, who are our patients, do not come from the hyper urban or the upmarket category of space of people. Okay.
Right.
So their adoption to digital is not as high. Okay. Second, and which I think is more prevalent across industries, is medicine by its own nature is extremely a high touch industry.
Correct.
Okay. And especially in our country. Okay. In our country, when a person falls sick, you look out for a doctor's hand. Whereas in many of the other countries, you need to just get into a hospital, which is a system, and everything is taken care of inside the system.
Correct.
You don't really bother who's there behind the system.
Correct.
But here it's not that. Here it's you hold on to an individual. The individual's credibility pulls you through in terms of how you recover.
Yeah,
so there's a mixed piece.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
So quickly, Shishendu, last question, and because you worked across industry, if you were to give one piece of advice to talent managers or HR managers in the healthcare industry, and more around saying that this is the lens you should look through around talent, and you've already given a lot of ideas and suggestions, but maybe one specific advice to talent managers in the healthcare industry, what would that be?
That's an interesting space, Bimal. I'll let the cat out of the bag. I've been doing a bit of reading around this for quite some time, and a very interesting book which I read very recently. It's called "If Disney Ran Your Hospital." So it's by this gentleman who was the CEO of Disney, and before that he was the CEO of one of the largest chain of hospitals in Florida. Okay. And amongst many learnings from that book, one thing stuck with me. When you define a hospital in terms of deliverables, okay, who's your patient in a hospital? If I ask you, what would your answer be? Yeah, I'm sorry, who's your customer? My mistake. Who's your customer?
The customer is possibly the family. That's the way I would look at it, the near and dear of the patient.
Right. So it's always, you're right. I mean, in most cases, the answer is the patient or something related to the patient.
Correct.
Now, if I change that paradigm and say that and I go back to my original, context where how a hospital has to be managed, not by the doctors, but by the administrators. If I take that in context, and if I say that actually your customers for a hospital is your doctors.
Okay, interesting.
your doctors are your customers, and your doctors are the reason why you are making money and you're growing.
Right.
The fact that they are treating patient can be incidental.
Interesting.
Okay, the patients are coming because of the doctors which are there.
Correct.
So change that outlook from looking at patient. Of course, patient satisfaction is something which has to be given, and patient satisfaction and safety is ingrained in your organizational culture. You can't change that. But shift it from the patient to being that, to being a doctor-centric hospital. You know, it might just change the outlook of the hospital completely.
Great. Yeah, that's a very, very interesting perspective. So, Shishendu, thank you very much for this conversation. I think it's been lovely as usual talking to you, but more important, some great insights for people who will end up listening to this video, and for talent managers, HR, but also I think a very different perspective on the business, which this is not a business many of us are familiar with. So to that extent, thank you for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bimal, for this opportunity once again. I hope this helps anybody, and a pleasure to talk to you.